Welcome to 50 Words Per Murder, where we delve into the stories behind the headlines. Today's an episode that I am really excited to do. We're going to be talking about the murder of Tupac Shakur, which has been unsolved for nearly 30 years. Tupac is one of the most iconic musicians to ever exist, in my opinion. And I would say just probably the absolute goat as far as rap goes. Like, you just really can't get much better than Tupac. I do have a guest with me today. He is a longtime friend, and he is a teacher. He teaches Latin, he teaches history, and so I thought he would be great for this particular episode because he also loves music, and particularly rap music. So I'm going to introduce Mark Crawley, who is my friend here. Go ahead, and if you want to say anything, you can.
Happy to be part of the show today, Justin.
Awesome. Well, I know that you and I, when I called you about this, we were talking about this show, and we were talking about, people who really made massive influences on music. And I was thinking about it, and I would say that Tupac to rap music is really kind of like what the Beatles were to pop.
I mean, you could say that. Yeah, I think in my opinion, there's a lot stronger argument to be made for other artists to be kind of the king of pop. If you literally have the title, you think of somebody else. But in rock music, pop music, soul music, it's hard to really claim it. Country music, but with rap, it's kind of Tupac and everybody else. I mean, he was iconic, and what so many modern rap artists have become, where you think of them as not just rappers, but people involved in fashion and film. He, in my mind, is kind of the archetype of the modern rapper. And he took it further than so many others in speaking to current social issues.
Yeah, and that's very eloquently put. And that was a big thing about his music, right? He was a poet before anything else. And he found a way to, explain the struggles of his community toward the Black community, towards misogyny, although there was a sexual assault charge, so we can, whatever. But he would speak out against that and the struggles that the community faced. And you were telling me something that I didn't know, basically that, his parents were Black Panthers, and we'll get into that in a second. But what we're going to do in this podcast, so people kind of know at the beginning, is we're going to journey back to that fateful night in Las Vegas that ultimately took his life. We're going to talk about facts and theories, what might have happened, a lot of things that led up to it. And we're going to probably culminate it around the fact that there was recently, in this last week that we're recording, this episode is being recorded, on July 25th, that last week there was a warrant served, a search warrant in regard to Tupac's case, which is the first movement there's been in a long time, which is actually one of the reasons we're making this episode too, because I had another one planned, but as soon as the Tupac warrant was served, I scratched it. I called Mark and I was like, hey, let's do something on Tupac. And I mean, obviously, it's obvious. So let's talk a little bit about Tupac. I will hand it over to Mark for that.
So he was born in 1971 in East Harlem, Upper Manhattan. Born Lassine Parish Crooks, but renamed Tupac Amaru Shakur, and that name alone tells you a lot about his parents. Tupac Amaru II was the last descendant, was a direct descendant of the last Incan ruler, the Incan Empire of Mesoamerica into the, Central Highlands and the western coast of South America that was quickly toppled by the Spanish. And Tupac Amaru II was a revolutionary. He was executed in Peru in 1781 for a failed revolt against Spanish rule. And his mother, Afeni Shakur, explained that she wanted him to have the name of a revolutionary, of indigenous people in this world, so that he knew he wasn't just a citizen of a country, a member of a neighborhood, but he was part of a bigger world culture, and he could make an impact as a revolutionary. And quickly, his family was very active in the Black Panther movement in the 60s and 70s. His mother was actually on trial 8 months pregnant with him as part of the Panther 21 trial. She was charged and acquitted with over 150 charges. His stepfather was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Both godfather and godmother convicted in crimes connected with the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army. And the crackdown on that movement was part of why his mother afterwards ended up how the family really collapsed, and there was struggles with drug addiction, and they moved to Baltimore, where he really took on a new interest in the arts. He went to Baltimore School of the Arts, studied acting, poetry, jazz, ballet, acted in Shakespeare plays, performed as the Mouse King in the Nutcracker Ballet, joined the Baltimore Young Communist League. This is somebody who was very involved and invested with all kinds of performing arts. And then in 88, I believe he would have been 17 at that point, yes, moved out to Marin City in the Bay Area and never finished high school there, earned his GED, and that's where he really got involved in the rap scene professionally rather than just amateur, which he did growing up. Really tried to make a name for himself moving back to New York as MC New York. He got involved with the Digital Underground, which was kind of a collective more than a group revolved around one or two specific artists. The first time he was actually on one of their songs as a featured artist was the 91 single Same Song. It got featured in the film Nothing But Trouble, which again, I don't know, but I would guess might have gotten him a little bit of a taste for seeing what music and film can do together. Kind of odd that that movie starred Dan Aykroyd, John Candy, Chevy Chase, and Demi Moore. It's kind of hard to think of Tupac in that category, but as we'll see, he had some very unique friendships that he maintained.
But you know what? So I was watching while I didn't get to finish the documentary because it's a 5-parter, but I was watching a documentary on him, and apparently one thing that was really incredible about Pac was that he really had the ability to adapt. Like, it didn't matter who it was. If they were saying whether he was hanging out with thugs or gangsters or the whitest of white people, you know, the most conservative of people, it didn't matter. He could adapt to them, talk like them, speak like them, and was very liked by pretty much everyone that he encountered him. He was a very likable guy. And on top of that, and I didn't mean to cut you off here, but on top of that,
you can cut me off. You're good.
And yeah, we're gonna be talking about this too, but you know, his music, you know, reflected his poetry, which turned into music, reflected his own experiences growing up in poverty and violence. And even when he moved to the Bay Area, he went to a very wealthy school, but he was one of the poor kids. He was on the other side of the track. In fact, you know, the project that he lived in overlooked the bay, and multi-million-dollar homes across the bay, you know, back multi-million in the 80s, you know, across the bay. And you know, he used the platform, especially as he grew, to, you know, shed light, which we'll get into on these issues. But yeah, I think that it's important to know that, you know, he was really able to, you know, to adapt well to whatever that environment was.
And you see some interesting long-lasting friendships. One thing I wasn't aware of before I started looking into this is from junior high on, he was good friends with Jada Pinkett. And the two of their friendship that lasted through both of their careers and, you know, marriages, and as they talk about themselves as almost more than friends, but a brother-sister type relationship. It's very interesting. Seeing some of the connections that stayed. But like you were saying, yeah, I think his experiences growing up really contributed with his first album, Tupacalypse Now, which dropped in 91. Obviously a reference to the famous movie Apocalypse Now. But it was much more self-aware and socially critical, where you really get these, you know, topics of what life is like for urban Black males in America. And, you know,
yeah, he was dealing with the struggles of racism, police brutality, inner city. And, you know, I think that it's really important to note that he was, what, 20 when this was released?
Yeah,
Like,
91, he was 20.
yeah, his social, which means he probably poured a lot of it at 19 or wrote a lot of it at 19, maybe even younger. His social consciousness was higher than most people 5 times his age at the time. Like, he was so aware. And again, going back to that one documentary, one of his cousins was saying that, when they were aware of the issues facing the black community, they knew a lot of things, but then when Tupac would rap, he knew so much more stuff that they weren't even thinking about. He was just on a much higher plane thought wise.
And you can see it in some of the songs, even on that first album, where if you've got, Brenda's Got a Baby or Trapped, in cycles of generational poverty and inequality. And
Yeah.
it's, I'm trying to think of a parallel at the time. I guess you could, NWA and Public Enemy, but those were more kind of angry commentary than thoughtful commentary. And as we
Yeah.
see, his shift and focus definitely changes album to album, but it seems like earlier on, when he's more fresh from the perspective of school and growing up, seeing the haves but not being one of them. Some of that, one thing that's interesting is looking at his music, you can almost see as he got more successful and got more affluent and got more and more involved in the gang lifestyle, you see some of these things continue, but some it gets to be more party tracks, more thug life tracks. But that's a trend that never goes away, even when he became, the top of the game.
A fun fact that you might find interesting is apparently Tupac and one of his cousins sold crack. Tupac did it for 5 days, and the cousin did it, or Tupac did it for 4 days, and the cousin did it for like 5 or 7. And apparently, the cousin was saying that he just couldn't sell his crack. Like, he just struggled with. He was too nice of a crack dealer to sell his crack, and Tupac didn't want to do it either because Tupac was really big. Um, in making sure that the black community didn't struggle, that there wasn't things afflicting them. And he knew that, the drug usage was a big problem. So he really struggled internally, uh, with that, because he had so much respect for the community and wanting to really make a change and be that. So he also had the Thug Life tattoo, and the Thug Life, it actually is an acronym, and I cannot remember what it is right now. I will come back to that, but it's actually an acronym, and I don't know if you knew that. Oh, and there's what
Yeah,
it is.
the hate you give for little
The hate,
infants fucks everybody.
yeah, the hate for little infants fucks everybody, and that's
The
what
hate
Thug Life
you
meant.
give for little infants.
The
The
hate
idea
for
that,
little infants.
whatever we do to the, weakest in our society, that doesn't, that kind of exploitation hurts everybody. And whether that's, racism, classism, creating a generation of poor, angry people doesn't contribute to a, peaceful, happy, productive society.
And it doesn't help with growth. And when you're coming back again, you're looking at the late '80s, early '90s here. You're not that far removed from the civil rights movement. There, despite what people might want to think in their minds, the black community still had a lot of. I mean, they still do today, but they had a lot of struggles back then. And you referenced NWA and Public Enemy, and both of them are awesome and iconic in their own rights. But they weren't. They basically put the issues out right in front, and there was no mincing words about it. Tupac's was a little bit more thought provoking, and you can call it maybe kind of a call to action, but it was not in a violent way. Like when you talk about NWA "Fuck the Police," which is probably the song they are most famous for, it is their anthem. That's what put them on the map. I mean, that song doesn't mince words, right? Like it is what it is. And the thing is, I'm not mad about that song. I get why they made that song, because for people who are listening to this who aren't old enough to remember, when you go back to the early '90s, like Rodney King, there was a big attack on black people. I mean, there really was. They were treated, they still are, very different, but they were violence and the brutality was just awful.
And we know now that some of what they were talking about has proved to be true, where you get, the strategists from Nixon's Southern strategy and war on drugs that came out and said, well, we couldn't just go after the hippies and the black community for voting Democrat. But if we could associate the black community with heroin and hippies with marijuana, and then we could pass high mandatory minimums and go after them, we could systematically devastate those communities. And Nixon and Reagan's war on drugs did exactly that, which, now we have more clarity on the purpose behind it. But people at the time were saying it.
Yeah, well, they knew, but everybody else, people like to put their heads in the sand. But and he talked about that, and his lyrics brought controversy. They led to criticism from the authorities, from the media. It was not well received, but that
even Dan Quayle came out after Tupacalypse Now came out, and I found a quote where Dan Quayle said, "There's no reason for a record like this to be released. It has no place in our society."
It's funny how often white people have so much to say about what the black community should say, isn't it? And I mean, I know that we're white, but it's we're not saying what they should say. We're not trying to silence it. And then throughout the 90s, from the early to mid 90s, he released 4 studio albums while he was alive. There were another 6 released posthumously. In fact, we talked about this, and he is one of the best-selling rap artists of all time. I believe actually he's ranked still at number 2, despite the fact that he died in 1996, 26 years ago. He was surpassed only by Eminem in the mid 2000s, and Eminem has at this point far surpassed that. He still holds the highest, second highest rap album sales, which again is extra impressive given the fact that he's been dead for 27 years and was only 25 when he died. He'd only been putting out albums for a few years, right? He also holds the record still to this day, holds the record for the highest charting posthumous single, which is called Ghetto Gospel, which Mark knew about, but I did not know about. It was I know, whatever. And it's amazing.
Would you get Elton John, Eminem, and Tupac together? It's a bang.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It was Tupac vocals with early Elton John vocals, with beats done and produced by Eminem, and the song is mind-blowingly good. I actually did a TikTok live last night, and I was telling people about this song. People were jumping out of the live to go listen to it, and they were coming back and like, "Oh my God, this song has blown my mind." I mean, it really is. Yeah. Like, and I'm not overbuilding the hype. I really am not.
And songs like that and Changes are iconic in that it's meant to be bringing everybody in to really look at some of the issues in society, unlike, Cop Killer and F the Police, which are very pick a side. It's everybody can see this clearly is not working. This clearly isn't helping people, and we can all do better. And that's one of the things that's so fascinating, at least for me, to see with Tupac's music, is that he could make, Two of America's Most Wanted as like an iconic, party track, gangster rap track. And then he could turn around and you look in his first 3 albums and you get Brenda's Got a Baby, Keep Your Head Up, and Dear Mama, that are, songs that are really tender, kind of empathetic anthems of female empowerment, which is obviously complicated with all of his songs where he's, speaking in very derogatory fashion about women, and for somebody who went to prison for sexual assault and has a complicated history of accusations. But that doesn't take away the fact that you can say, here's somebody who's really trying to question the system that he's a part of and is very seemingly aware of the paradox of, what it's like to be a, a young black man or a young black woman in America. And there's seemingly contradictory pressures that we're supposed to be facing.
And I do want to go back to Ghetto Gospel real quick, because even Elton John came back. I was like, I don't know how Eminem did this, but it basically was genius. And just a fun side note, and you might know this, but listeners might not. When Eminem was struggling in the early 2000s with sobriety, Elton John used to call him every day. Elton John he's done that with Britney Spears too. He's kind of just, Elton's just a good dude. He really just is. He's a good dude. Anyways, and I know we're spending a lot of time.
Good ones go.
He has. He's a legend. He's a living legend, and he's lost a lot of friends over the years to drugs. I mean, he has. That he was involved in that scene at one point too. A lot of them were. My friend works for Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper went sober a long time ago too. The ones that were able to do that, are still with us, thank God. And a lot of them aren't. And look, I know that we're spending a lot of time on this background, but I think it's important as we begin to get into what happened and the reasons why he might have been killed, is to talk about this, because he was very controversial, very outspoken, especially when it came to social issues like racism, inequality, police brutality. And he used his music as a platform to address these topics and advocate for change. And he's doing this at a time where a lot of people don't like that. So let's real quick, one honorable mention. We won't spend a lot of time on this. He did appear in several films, including Juice, Poetic Justice, and Above the Rim. He did act.
Oddly, and he was cast in several other movies. He was going to be the star in Menace to Society. Little known fact, George Lucas actually wrote the part for Mace Windu in the Star Wars prequel trilogies for Tupac. And only when Tupac passed did he offer it to Samuel L. Jackson. Tupac would have been a Jedi, and he would have been a Jedi Master.
That is a little. I didn't know that at all. Well, Tupac had several legal issues during his life, including run-ins with law enforcement and various criminal charges. He was incarcerated 4 times. The first time was in 1991. He served 10 days after being charged with assault and battery. Those charges stemmed from an altercation involving the director of the film Menace to Society, speaking of. And this incident occurred during the filming of the movie, in which Tupac was originally cast, as you said, but then replaced. Probably because, he got into an altercation with the director of the film. The second incarceration was in 1994. He was sentenced to 15 days for assaulting his former limousine driver. And the incident reportedly occurred after an argument between Tupac and the driver escalated. And I think that bear these in mind as we get into the night he died and the East Coast, West Coast wars, which we're going to get into in a minute. Then there was a sexual assault case, which is one of the more significant and controversial incidents in his life. His involvement in the case in 1993, a woman basically accused him and 2 of his associates, colleagues, of assaulting her in a hotel room. And then in 1995, he was found guilty of sexual abuse and sentenced to prison. And he maintained his innocence throughout the entire trial, claimed that the encounter was consensual, and he served approximately 9 months of his sentence at the Clinton Correctional Facility in New York before he was released on bail pending an appeal. So before we talk about, let's talk. This is going to kind of be a prelude into the East Coast, West Coast wars and the significance of somebody involved in this, which is a man by the name of Suge Knight. Okay, so Suge Knight was a producer. He was the co-founder of Death Row Records, and his sphere of influence was so incredibly high. The reason that Tupac essentially got released was Suge put out $1.4 million in bail and signed him to a very lucrative contract. And that's when he was able to be released a little bit early. I don't know if you were aware of that or not, Mark, but
signed him, then paid the bail.
Yeah, signed him, then paid the bail. Well, true, fair. That is important to note because, and then he was released. And remember the name Suge Knight as we talk about this because it's important. And then we get to the final incarceration, which was on February 14th of 1995. He was sentenced to 1.5 to 4.5 years in prison for violating his probation from the sexual assault case. it was due to an incident where he got into yet another physical altercation with a fellow rapper in a shopping mall. Again, this all is kind of a prelude into what we're about to get into. And while he was in prison, it was a period of time of self-reflection and artistic growth. He devoted time to reading books. He actually started a reading club for fellow inmates. And again, like we talked about, during that time, he signed with Death Row Records, which, as we know, was significant for him, for Suge, and for what was to come. So, like I said too, he did lead that. I brushed over this, but I kind of want to say a little bit more. He led a prison reading club because he wanted to encourage other inmates to read books and inspire personal growth and introspection on those people in there.
And one thing I had heard that I also found interesting is that early, before his career really took off, he was still reading a lot. And as he got more and more involved with the business, with the scene, with drugs and alcohol, wasn't really reading. And in prison, got back to reading because obviously you've got time. And it was at that point that he read Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Sun Tzu's Art of War that come up as themes in a lot of his music after that.
Absolutely. And on top of that, we know that he was already very enlightened, and his experiences with incarceration and the justice system had an incredible influence on him, specifically his music and his personal outlook on things, because he was able to see how he was treated from a firsthand perspective, right? So then he began to address themes of injustice, poverty, life struggles in many of his songs, and oftentimes drawing from his own experiences while he was incarcerated. And his time in prison further solidified that thug life persona and his resolve to be an advocate for marginalized communities. Now, one other thing, you mentioned how he read a lot, and I think that's obviously significant, because that's sign of somebody who's enlightened, right? Somebody who wants to constantly read, a thirst for knowledge. But he also was an avid writer and kept a journal basically the entire time throughout his life, containing his thoughts and poems and ideas collected over I don't even know how many personal diaries. So now you guys have a little bit of an understanding of his background. So now let's talk about that fateful night, September 6, 1996. Mark, I'll let you kind of introduce that if you want. Or you want me to do it?
Well, I feel like this is when we might want to kind of go back to maybe talk a little bit about the relationship that developed between him and Biggie and his whole crew.
Okay, well then let's.
There's some little bit more we've got to, for people who may not be so familiar with it.
Okay, well let's do that. Let's talk a little bit more about Suge, and then we can talk about the East Coast West Coast wars. How's that sound? Because I know that's what you're getting at. And here's the reason why we're going to focus on Suge Knight. Suge Knight is a very controversial figure. He's actually in jail right now, as we speak, as we record this, for voluntary manslaughter, where he basically put the car in reverse and backed over the guy again. I mean, he's not, he's an interesting guy, okay? But he was a prominent figure at the time in the music industry. As I mentioned earlier, he was the co-founder of Death Row Records with Dr. Dre. And aside from Tupac, let's talk about some of the notable people who were on Death Row Records. Obviously, Dr. Dre. Obviously, Tupac. Snoop Dogg. Nate Dogg. Warren G. And, I mean, to say that Death Row Records at that time was a powerhouse in the music industry, I would say is an understatement. And this label played a crucial role in shaping the West Coast hip hop scene and still remains a significant part of hip hop's legacy. But part of that scene essentially ends up, playing into what happened with the East Coast and Diddy's label. So we talked about, Suge having the power to get Pac bailed out of jail. And, here's the thing. Their relationship was not without controversy. It was very complex. And while Suge's support was crucial for Tupac's career, there were also disputes and conflicts within Death Row that Tupac found himself entangled in. Moreover, Suge Knight's reputation for being involved in various legal issues and his alleged association with criminal activities added further scrutiny to Tupac's own image. And again, as I mentioned earlier, and let's just kind of give exactly what happened, I think that it is very notable to mention that Suge is currently serving a 28-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter.
Wait,
the judge
he was
sentenced
a crime boss who owned
he was a crime boss. He was. I mean,
And
that's he
there
was.
are all the you hear about like the urban legends of like how does he own the rights to Vanilla Ice's hit Ice Ice Baby? And I remember growing up hearing the story that Suge Knight held him out of a window until he agreed to sign over the rights. That was disproven, but it's one of those, why would anybody sign over the rights to their one mega hit?
I mean, let's
There
be
was
real.
leverage.
Let's be real, Mark. We could do an entire episode on Suge Knight.
Oh yeah.
I mean, easily. I mean, and maybe that's something we do in the future. But because I mean, it is true crime podcast. Is not. I mean, I would imagine there's murder in his background too. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But potentially.
And it's interesting that, not only do we get the complicated relationship between Tupac and then his, Suge, who was his manager on the label, but we also get the complicated relationship between him and Notorious B.I.G., who was an up and coming rapper in New York who, at one point when he was visiting LA, asked a friend to introduce him to Tupac. They became friends. He had reportedly even asked Tupac to be his manager. And Tupac said that Sean Combs would be a better manager, which, if you got Puff Daddy as your manager, you could do a lot worse than that. And as we know, he dedicated his early career to making Biggie huge. But at the time, they would visit each other when they were on the other side of the country.
They were on tracks together, and those tracks are fire.
Oh, yeah. And Tupac invited Biggie to be a part of his side group, Thug Life, but Biggie decided to make his own side group, which became Junior Mafia, where you have Lil Caesar, Lil Kim, Puff Daddy, and then, some other kind of affiliated people. And early on, Notorious B.I.G. really kind of was trying to model his image after Tupac, being more than just a lyricist and a rapper, but trying to get involved with high fashion. It was Versace and Gucci. Tupac, even at one point with his girlfriend, I wasn't aware that when he passed, he was dating Rashida Jones's sister. And the two of them walked a Versace fashion show together.
Well, let's
not aware.
Yeah, well, because we're into it a little bit, let's talk about the East Coast West Coast War. How about you want to do that? Okay. So to give people a little bit of background, this was highly publicized in the 90s. I mean, I was between middle school and high school in the 90s, and it was very, very well publicized. Like, just you knew about this rivalry. And it was shown in the music, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically what it was a contentious rivalry between hip-hop artists and fans from the East Coast and the West Coast. And at the center of this feud, as Mark mentioned, were Tupac and Notorious B.I.G., Biggie, who was from the East Coast. And the origins of this feud can be traced back to the early 90s when hip-hop was becoming a dominant and influential genre of the music industry. And during this period, the East Coast, particularly New York City, was considered to be the birthplace and the heart of hip-hop, with artists like Biggie, Jay-Z, Nas gaining significant recognition and success. Now, on the other hand, the West Coast, particularly LA, had also risen to prominence in the hip-hop scene, and you had artists like Tupac, Dr. Dre, Snoop, Ice Cube, who had become iconic figures in West Coast hip-hop and shaping its unique style and culture. And Tupac's death has often been, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, often been associated as a direct result of this feud, as was Biggie's, because Biggie was killed about right 6 months after, in March of
Something like that. I
'97.
don't remember the
Yeah,
date right offhand.
it was March of '97, and Biggie was in LA and he was fatally shot, which added to the complexity of the feud and fueled even more conspiracy theories. Tensions between the two coasts escalated in the mid '90s, and it was fueled by a series of personal conflicts, perceived slights, some not so perceived. we get
Well,
into
I
the
mean, the
tracks.
Quad City or the Quad Studios shooting where Tupac had gotten involved with, when your nickname is Jimmy Henchman, you maybe should be raise some red flags. And
Yeah,
this guy had offered Tupac money to stop by Quad Studios in Times Square to record a verse for a friend. And he agreed. He was going through some legal trouble, was trying to, be a feature on other people's tracks, make some money wherever he could. And he got there with some of his friends from Digital Underground. And in the lobby, before he even got in, 3 men tried to rob him. He resisted and he got shot. And he was convinced it was a setup. And in an interview afterwards, with Vibe magazine, he directly accused P. Diddy, Jimmy Henchman, and Biggie, who were at Quad Studios at that time, of setting him up. And
he believed that till the day he died. He believed that Diddy was responsible for his death.
and
The day he died, or not his death, his shooting. Sorry.
What I would say is the critical moment is when P. Diddy and Biggie released a track, "Who Shot Ya?" And then Tupac took this as a pretty direct target, and he released what, in my opinion, is the hardest diss track to ever be released, at least in that genre, of "Hit 'Em Up," where
Which is a great song.
he goes after everybody, not just Biggie, not just P. Diddy, but goes Lil Kim, Lil Caesar, Mobb Deep, Chino XL, and essentially says it's war. If this is how it's going to be, we are going to, what's the line? My fofo will make sure yo kids don't grow. And it is threat to absolutely annihilate this entire record label. And it, from the first line, it is there are no holds barred and no quarter given. And
let's
that
let's
is
talk about
where
this.
it goes from kind of behind the scenes beef, a lot of which was involving dealings with Suge Knight, who had ticked off a lot of people in his days, to open now accusations that this Junior Mafia crew set up Tupac being shot, and now he's threatening to have somebody shoot them.
And if people don't know "Hit 'Em Up," go listen to that song. It is, it's the ultimate diss track. But I don't know if you knew this, because I don't think we talked about this. As recently as 2018, Eminem released a song, called "Kill Shot." Do you know what I'm about to go talk about?
Not right offhand.
Okay. Here's a line in the song "Kill Shot." Okay. "Kill shot, I will not fail. I'm with the doc," meaning Dr. Dre still. "But this idiot's boss pops pills, tells him he's got skills. But Kells," this is when he was in the war he was in the own feud with Machine Gun Kelly. "But Kells, the day you put out a hit, the day Diddy admits he put out the hit that got Pop killed." And that was in 2018.
I mean, calling it a war with Machine Gun Kelly.
Well, it wasn't really a war against Eminem.
I mean, Eminem beefing with Machine Gun Kelly is like swatting a fly with a Buick. Like, that is not a fair fight.
But fair. But the diss track here is that the day Kells puts out a hit, the day Diddy admits that he put out the hit that got Pop killed.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Even in 2018, and then Diddy responded to it. He was not happy with it, and Eminem had to be like, "Well, I'm just joking," like it was just a joke.
Just joking.
Just a joke. Just a joke. So
subtle accusations of, conspiracy to commit murder. No biggie.
No, not big at all. Well, so that robbery you were talking about, by the way, was in '94 when that happened.
Yes.
And as far as the East Coast West Coast feud go, it still remains a significant and tragic chapter in hip hop history. it does serve a bit of as a cautionary tale about the destructive consequences of rivalry and the importance of unity and respect among fellow artists. And when actually, so I agree with your statement about Machine Gun Kelly and Eminem. I totally do. But I remember when that was being publicized, obviously not to the degree this was. And I remember saying to Alyssa, my wife, for those of y'all who don't know, like, I hope that this doesn't culminate into something that gets Eminem killed, because I love Eminem. And fortunately it didn't, but you just never know how these things are going to escalate, and when you have the East Coast West Coast war on it, then yeah.
Well, luckily, I like some of his music, but luckily Machine Gun Kelly isn't a real gangster. Unlike some of the players involved in the 90s who were, when
Real
you look
gangsters.
at Ice-T and Tupac, or not, Ice-T, Snoop, Too Short, were literally pimps and drug dealers who found out that they could make just as much or more money rapping about dealing drugs and pimping without then breaking any law.
Yeah.
Like, Ice-T famously talks about how he'd never rapped on anything, but walked into a record label, got a meeting with the exec, and convinced him to give him a record deal. And then just got some studio time and figured out how to rap. And, it was gangsters who became rappers, where you don't see much of that anymore. And again,
No.
not to glorify that, but it was a different era where, and I mean, even I was looking through all the different criminal and civil cases involving Tupac. There were so many. I mean, 2 involving escalations with police, the one where, even after he had been, while he was out on, after going to prison, carrying pistols, there was a wrongful death suit.
Wasn't it? Yeah. Wasn't that the one in Atlanta where, like, he saw, so he saw somebody assaulting a couple white guys assaulting a black guy, and they basically ran him down. And Tupac, like, gets down on his knees, like he's a freaking sniper, pulled out his gun and, like, shoots. And the police eventually show up at his hotel, and he's just being chill, telling him, "Hey, listen to my new track, Dear Mama."
Oh, so this is what I saw, and I was making some notes on some of these, that there was an incident in 91 where he was stopped for jaywalking, and police literally, like, pinned him on the ground and were dragging, like, scraping his face all on the
that's excessive.
asphalt. And in 93, he was arrested for shooting 2 off-duty police officers. They ended up throwing out the case, and then both of the police officers, who were brothers, filed civil suits against him and settled out of court. But the accounts were so different. Some people said that the 2 white police officers were harassing black people and using some racial slurs. There's argument about who fired first, but there were gunshots fired each way. But it ends up that, and when even the cops can't take the cops' side, I mean, if I know anything of the history of cases involving excessive force with young African-American males and police, if they drop the charges that were brought on by the cops, then the cops were probably pretty out of line, because usually the police union protects their own.
Okay, so
sorry.
No, you're good. No, I know. I agree. No, I think it's important to note. I think that because everything that we're talking about, like what you just mentioned, that's a whole part of what he was about as a person and trying to look out for the black community. That's why he fired those shots, because he saw, black people being treated unfairly. Now, could he have done it probably a different way, gone about it differently? Probably. But, he didn't. But you know what? I bet you those 2 cops probably thought differently the next time they harassed black people. So it was probably effective. I mean, I don't know that to be true, but I would imagine it's his version of vigilante justice was probably effective to a degree.
Yes. Now, less effective. I also saw another thing I didn't know. In 92, he was performing a festival and afterwards was signing autographs. And a legally owned and carried pistol he had fell onto the ground and went off and killed a 6-year-old boy.
I did not know that. That's
And
tragic.
another family filed. One of the things that I was surprised is how many civil lawsuits there were against Tupac. And Justin and I were talking before this about one of the things that I'm just always amazed by with certain artists, and Tupac is one of them, the ones that just produce. He was prolific. It almost seems like he had a sense, like a premonition, that he wasn't going to be around long and just needed to be in the studio and
He
was
lived in the studio pretty
constantly.
much. Yeah.
And yeah, and like the last album that was, or the first posthumous relief, what is it, the 7-Day Theory, Machiavelli, he wrote and recorded the whole album in, I think, 3 days, and they took 4 days to mix it. And that's why it's called the 7-Day Theory. How many people can write and record an album in 3 days? As a musician, I'm just baffled, flabbergasted by that. And when you can look at all these people finding all these tracks and being able to say, oh, hey, we found this other great track. Let's get it to, artists like Eminem and Elton John and make something new. And you can keep, I mean, even in the early 2000s, you get Dave Chappelle joking about all this new Tupac music that's still coming out and seems to be so relevant now that it's almost like he's not dead or he knew the future.
Look at you hinting at one of the theories.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to get.
No, you're fine to do. You're fine to do that. Look at you hitting at one.
We're
not about it.
He just packed so much into those years, and where I was going with that, of thinking about it, there are also, I was reading that some people were suggesting some of his prolific recording was because of he had all these legal costs from criminal lawsuits, from civil lawsuits that he was trying to stay ahead of. And I imagine that must have been a very expensive team of lawyers on retainer.
It would. I would imagine so too. But and I get that, and I would imagine that's part of it. But it's one thing to just put music out for the sake of putting music out. Even with all the stuff he did, it was all still very powerful. It was all still very meaningful. It wasn't like, oh, I got to put this out to make, to appease the label. He didn't speak unless he had a reason to.
He didn't quantity.
It was quality, but it was both. That's the thing. It was both. And it was fast because he put so much of it out. Now, I think we got a good background. Let's go to September 6th.
Yeah.
Do that? You ready? Okay.
Yeah.
So September 6th, 1996, around 11:15 p.m., while stopped at a red light at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, a white Cadillac pulls up alongside Tupac's. There's a black BMW 740i that was headed to Club 662 in Las Vegas. And in that car was Suge Knight driving and Tupac. And this white Cadillac pulls up alongside of them, and I'm using air quotes here, unidentified assailant inside the Cadillac opens fire, ultimately shooting Tupac multiple times. He was hit in the chest, arm, and thigh, and to this day, the exact number of shots fired has not been definitively confirmed. But we do know that several gunshots struck Tupac during the attack. Now, so what happened when he got shot. He did not die right away. He was transported to the hospital. But let's talk about what happened earlier in that evening. That might have...
That was something I, as a child growing up in the 90s, I knew the context. I was not aware of the hotel lobby incident and again, Suge Knight escalating things.
Big surprise. Well, both of them had hot heads, so big surprise. And who, Mark, we'll just ask you like you don't know. Who, Mark, who was the guy who got escalated with? Well, first, what were they doing? Where were they?
So I know they were going to a Tyson fight.
Mhm.
And there's actually, did you ever watch the 30 for 30 One Night in Vegas?
I did not.
It's a whole ESPN 30 for 30 documentary about Mike Tyson and Tupac, and it's great. And I only say this because you said they're both hothead. Mike Tyson.
So is Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson says that 5'2" Tupac was the only person he ever met who wasn't scared of him.
Wow, that says a lot.
And they were friends who would visit and write to each other when they were in prison. And again, each of them spent some time in prison. And Tupac was going to a Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. And afterwards, in the lobby, one of Suge's people saw this guy, Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, who was a member of the Crips, and he told Tupac and Suge that that guy had tried to rob him earlier. So this is past beef. And there is hotel surveillance footage that shows them trying to jump this guy in the lobby.
It was highly publicized.
Oh, yeah.
Back
So
then.
it is clear that Suge's people started it. They jumped this guy in the lobby of the hotel. And if you know anything about casinos, every inch of a casino has a camera on it.
Oh, yeah. And eyes that watch those cameras.
Oh, yeah. And so they got in this fight. Then they leave and they're going to a club where Suge owns, and in this whole big convoy. And one thing that was interesting is Tupac's bodyguard wasn't in the car with him. He was in the car with Tupac's girlfriend. But also I saw that between the lobby fight and the shooting, he got stopped by a bike cop.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they got stopped by bike cops. So this night is so well documented. They got stopped for not having license plate and for playing music too loud. The license plate was they had the license plate in the trunk. But one of these things that just adds to the mystery of it is like, why do you have a BMW 750iL with no plates? Like, if you take the plates off a car, I mean, why does somebody take the plates off their car, Justin?
Because they're doing some shady ass shit. But
yeah, you're about to go commit a crime. And
but the thing is, his BMW. I mean, maybe it wasn't then. Maybe we're looking at it through the eyes of 2023. But I mean, his BMW is iconic. Now it's not like it was like a stock 40. It was. I mean, it was murdered out. Giant ass chrome rims. I mean, it was sick for sure. But
yeah.
it was not a car you weren't going to not notice. But yeah. So I didn't know about the bike cops, but yeah, I agree with you. You're not going to take your plate off unless you have a reason to.
And one of the reasons that night is so well documented, and that's one of the things that 30 for 30 talks about, is that you can track these two icons of that era, Mike Tyson and Tupac Shakur. You can track everything that happens to them that night.
Well, going back to September 6th, 11:15, he gets shot. And Suge was shot too, by the way. Obviously, it was not lethal. He's still alive and serving that 28-year sentence. By the way, he's not eligible for parole just so you know, until October of 34. He'll be able to get out then. So he's still got some time in there,
And he's not getting out early for good behavior.
Oh, he sure as hell's not. I'm sure he'll probably get time tacked on if anything. And I'm sure he's running it like a kingpin in there too. Like, I'm sure he's got no problem.
Yeah.
Well, despite being seriously injured, though, he managed to drive the BMW away from the scene and headed to a nearby hotel to seek help. He was then taken to University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, where he underwent surgery. And despite the medical efforts, Tupac succumbed to his injuries and passed away at the age of 25. Now, before we get into theories and whatnot, if you do know, I still want to say it. Do you know what his last words were?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. So Las Vegas Metro Police Department Lieutenant Chris Carroll, he was on the scene that night, and he actually held Tupac in his arms while he was dying before he was taken, I guess, or whatever was happening there. Because to me, it's a little conflicting. I don't know exactly how he was there. Maybe it was at the hotel because Suge drove off, and
But he died. It was like a week later?
week later, yeah. But he did. But after he went to the hospital, he never said another word.
Okay,
because he was gone. He wasn't gone, but he was gone. But he told him while he was in the arms, dying, and he tried to get Tupac to identify a shooter. Like, man, who shot you? And that's specifically what he asked. He goes, "Who shot you?" And Pac looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Fuck you." And that was the last thing Pac ever said. Which, I mean, I don't know about you, but that's as thug and as gangster as you can get.
Oh, speaking of gangsters, you could get one thing I heard. Did you hear what was done with at least some of his ashes after he was cremated?
I've heard they were smoked.
Yeah, apparently.
Is that true?
Members of, I mean,
who knows?
It's out there as
urban legend.
But that members of the Outlaws, which was a group he was with, recalling a line from his song Black Jesus, where he had said, like, "Hey, I want y'all to roll me up and smoke me when I'm gone," mixed some of his ashes in a blunt and smoked it, which is also
just like top level.
I didn't think I would say it, but I was shocked. But after you're saying his last words, I mean, just again, like him or not, the man was iconic, and
even in death,
this image of why everybody can look at this. I mean, you hear that voice. It's this huge voice from this little dude. The flow, the lyrics, the image, also, just such a charismatic and attractive, I can say as a heterosexual male, like there's a reason he was getting starring roles in movies. Like he was a good-looking dude. Yeah, and especially the eyes, it's just the intensity that why you still see. I teach high school and I still talk to kids who listen to Tupac.
Let's actually pause there for a minute because you and I talked about something, and then after this we're going to get to the investigation. But we were talking about Tupac, and you told me how you have some of your kids listen to him, and explain briefly why.
Oh, I teach Latin, and I teach Latin in high school, and there's my favorite ancient Roman is Marcus Tullius Cicero, R.I.P. And it's hard to read some of his speeches because we don't really have a context. Even on the messiest, sloppiest day of the House of Representatives, you don't just get to the level of open mudslinging that the Roman Republic was. And there are some of his speeches that are really strong invective, where he is just attempting verbal assassination of another politician of his time. And for years, I would try to get students to read this and who didn't really understand all the history and the implications of the time. And so one thing I've done is just to very briefly, when I introduce the history before we start reading it, to give a 10-minute version of 90s East Coast, West Coast rap beef. And I've given homework, listen to Hit 'Em Up. And when they come back and these students are just like, "Oh, Mr. Crowley, that was a lot." And I always tell them, don't listen to it out loud around, little siblings and parents. And if you tell anybody I told you to listen to this for homework, I will deny it.
But now it's on a podcast.
But just to, well, yeah, I mean, whatever. It's out there anyways. But,
public domain.
Millions of spins on Spotify. But the idea of teaching ancient Roman invective as a diss track, because I don't think until Tupac anybody ever took down another human as hard verbally as Cicero did.
And with such style.
Yeah,
with such style.
and where, you know, Tupac does it in 3.5 minutes and Cicero does it in 3.5 hours, but it's also in the courtroom versus in the Senate. It's a different medium. But that's something that it's been interesting that I've found kids can say, okay, here is this thing where, you know, especially with one speech where there have been 2 assassination attempts against Cicero, and he's the consul, which is like the equivalent of the president in the Roman Republic. And this rival who's tried to have him assassinated twice. And Cicero gives this speech where he just rips him. And I was like, hit him up. That's hit him up. Like,
Yeah.
you
It's
tried to kill me,
ancient.
but your punch didn't finish. Now you're about to feel the wrath of a menace, right? Like,
Yeah, that's why we were talking about that. I thought that was brilliant. And by the way, all of these reasons why Mark is on this podcast with me today. Okay, so now you guys know about his background. You know about the night of his death. Let's talk about the investigation. The investigation into his murder has been very complex and controversial. There are a ton of theories. We're going to address a lot of those theories, but not all of them, believe it or not, because there are so many. But these theories have been proposed over the years, a lot of different suspects. And after the shooting, immediately after, Las Vegas Metro PD launched a thorough investigation to find the culprits behind the murder. They immediately conducted interviews with witnesses, reviewed surveillance footage from nearby hotels and establishments, which, again, as Mark mentioned earlier, this is Las Vegas. Even in the early 90s, cameras are everywhere. They also collected evidence from the crime scene, including shell casings and the vehicle involved in the shooting. There are also issues with the, and I'm using air quotes again, evidence. For example, there was, again, when you think about Las Vegas, even back then, there was lack of clear surveillance footage capturing the actual shooting, despite the presence of numerous hotels and casinos in that area. The forensic evidence collected from that crime scene didn't lead to any conclusive breakthroughs identifying the shooter. Another issue was disputes between law enforcement agencies themselves. The investigation was complicated by conflicts and disputes between law enforcement agencies from different jurisdictions, including Las Vegas and Los Angeles, where Tupac was heavily associated, obviously, with the music scene. One of the other challenges law enforcement had faced during the investigation was lack of witness cooperation. Many individuals who were present during the shooting were very reluctant to come forward, either due to fear of retaliation or distrusting the police.
if the victim is himself, his last
Yeah, the
word-
victim said "fuck you" to the police. Like, he didn't even disclose who killed him.
Oh, I didn't know that, but you're not getting a lot of cooperation.
Yeah, no, the victim. Yeah, Tupac never told him who did it. He just said "fuck you." That was his last words.
And I know several people connected to it died shortly afterwards in separate shooting incidents. One,
including Baby Lane.
Say what?
Including Orlando Baby Lane.
Anderson. Yeah. And Biggie.
But not Diddy. No, I'm not coming after you, Diddy. Don't sue me. But
I mean, to be fair, I was about to say, while we're just speaking wild, slanderous speculation, but I shouldn't engage in wild, slanderous speculation. I don't think Biggie, of what I know of P. Diddy, he wouldn't be the guy there holding the 9. He would keep his hands clean. He is an excellent businessman, and he's
we're going to talk about
successful in all of his ventures. I don't think he would be foolish enough to put himself anywhere where like fingerprints or cameras could get him.
Well,
that is
you hold that thought. You hold that thought because Diddy is definitely one of the theories, and we're going to get to it. But here's the thing: as the years have passed, some individuals who've had information related to the case, as you just said, were killed under mysterious circumstances, which further complicates the investigation. Right. Okay. So now let's talk about theories. Okay. So there are several we're going to talk about. And throughout this investigation, a lot of theories, a lot. I mean, I can't even, I know I'm saying this a lot. I can't even stress how many potential things have come out about it and suspects have came to light. One of the top suspects over the years has been Orlando Baby Lane Anderson. He was considered a possible perpetrator due to the altercation that he and Pac got into in the lobby of the MGM earlier that evening. And then additionally, the hip hop rivalry between East and West Coast raised speculations that the shooting might have been connected to that. And as we talk about theories, we're going to talk more probably about the East Coast, West Coast. I think we talked a lot about it, but I think more of it's going to come out as we talk about this. And before we talk about theories further, though, I think it would be very irresponsible of me if I didn't mention that conspiracy theories surrounding celebrity deaths are not uncommon, and it's essential to approach these claims with skepticism and rely on credible evidence and official investigations. Now, Tupac's murder remains officially unsolved, and the exact circumstances surrounding his death continue to be a subject of interest and speculation in pop culture.
Yeah.
Now that
He said, we are not endorsing any of these conspiracy theories. We are just summarizing them for those who maybe weren't children of 90s hip hop.
Now, all of that said, let's jump into some theories. And I'm going to save my favorite ones for the end of the segment. But yeah, like you said, we need to know a lot about it. So let's talk about, again, theory one. You guys know about the East Coast, West Coast background. And this theory suggests that Tupac's murder was a gang-related feud. It suggests that Tupac's murder was a result of an ongoing East Coast, West Coast hip-hop rivalry, and suggests that the feud between Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. led to his assassination. The feud escalated with diss tracks, and we've talked about them. The diss tracks are out there, and Hit 'Em Up is probably the best example, but Hit 'Em Up is not the only one. They are a doozy.
If somebody wrote something like Hit 'Em Up about me, I would be very upset. And were I a gang-affiliated person and I was that upset, I would, in theory, have the capability to do something about it.
Real quick, do you know where the term "it's a doozy" came from?
No.
Side note? Oh, I do. I do. Okay. So side note has nothing to do with Tupac at all. It's actually car related, believe it or not. In the
Duesenberg?
There used to be a car called a Duesenberg. It was very high luxury. Like when you talk about like money, like the average, you could buy a Model T for like a few $100 back in the 20s and 30s. A Duesenberg was going to cost you 25 grand. And so it'd be like, that's a doozy when it came by because it was such a high-end iconic car. That's where it came from. It's a doozy.
Multi-million-dollar car now.
Oh, like a Bugatti Veyron, something like that, or high-end Lamborghini, like very high-end. But anyways, that's completely side note, but there you go. Now you know. Now you know.
I know.
Now you know the etymology of the word.
And we know the etymology of Tupac Amaru.
We do.
The Peruvian revolutionary against Spanish rule.
So yeah, exactly. So the diss tracks, which we talked about, insults, public confrontations, all of that fueled tensions between artists and their respective fan bases. So that's the thing. It became so much more like you were picking a side. Like even before we've done this, I talked about things just like, who are you for, Biggie or Tupac? You're not putting anybody else in that because those were the two icons of the coast at that time.
Except, I don't know.
I know. We know your opinion.
I don't think that's even like.
I know.
But Notorious Thugs is great, but that's the only Biggie song that I would put on the same level as any Tupac song, and that's mostly because of Bone Thugs and Harmony.
Mo Money, Mo Problems is good too, but we can agree to disagree.
It's a Bone Thugs song featuring Biggie.
All right. Anyway, I know that is a great song, but okay, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But it means that their fan bases got involved too. And so you had that, which, fueled it as well. And some people believe that Tupac shooting was orchestrated by rival gang members from the East Coast who orchestrated that attack. In particular, there were suggestions that the Crips gang primarily associated with the West Coast also were involved in the shooting. And that was, again, fueled by the altercation of Tupac and Orlando just hours before the shooting. So there you go. There's one theory with two separate gangs involved, basically. And one of those talks about the fact that it was part of the East Coast West Coast hip hop rivalry, and the other one talks about the altercation. Do you have anything you want to add to that one? All right, theory 2.
But I will add one thing.
Hmm.
We know Bone Thugs and Harmony weren't involved because they were some harmonious brothers, and they did tracks with both Biggie and Tupac. Cleveland stayed out of the beef.
And frankly, as we're being fair to Bone Thugs and Harmony, their tracks are fire on their own.
Oh yeah, how could anybody have beef with Bone Thugs? They'd be like, exactly. Let's sit down and talk about it, and then maybe make some fire music, and then everybody would be like, yeah, cool, we're good.
So theory 1 gives us a good segue into the next theory, which is that it was retaliation for the Las Vegas brawl. Okay, so we touched on it in theory 1, but in this one, basically, according to this one, Tupac's murder was retaliation for the altercation between Tupac and his entourage. Again, this was at the Mike Tyson fight, very highly publicized, and a lot of people. It's basically been suggested that those involved in the fight sought revenge and orchestrated Tupac's murder in response. But here's the thing. Here's my question for you, Mark. Do you think that it would have been possible for them to have orchestrated something like that quickly after the fight? Like after the altercation? Do you think that they could have orchestrated this retaliation payback within hours?
All right.
And not leave any evidence. Go ahead.
I'm a Latin teacher. I'm about the furthest thing from a gang member that you can get. So I have no experience in gang affiliation, but my wife and I have watched a lot of documentaries on, gangs in America because I find them fascinating. I don't think it requires a lot of coordination to just say, hey, those guys just jumped me. Let's jump in a car and follow them and try to shoot them.
Not fair.
This wasn't some, JFK style planning for a, sniper style assassination. This seems very kind of clunky and impromptu. Just somebody pull up next to somebody and blast them.
I guess in my mind, I was thinking about it as this well orchestrated, like mafia style kind of hit, but I guess it doesn't have to be that.
I feel like if it would have been way less public and more successful. I mean, you don't blindly shoot into a car.
But it was successful. Nobody's ever been charged.
Oh, I mean, more successful in that they would have got him right away.
Yeah.
Like, he had a fighting chance despite being hit by several bullets. But my 2 cents. I don't feel like this is one that feels like it's some big
master plan,
sinister orchestration. It could be your theory 1 of this is just gang retaliation.
Okay.
There was a conflict that led to a second conflict in the Suge and Tupac and their crew jumping Baby Lane in the lobby, and then Baby Lane and his guys got in the car and followed him and shot him.
All right.
Well,
that's possible.
It could be just as simple as that.
All right. So let's talk about theory 3. Some conspiracy theories suggest that law enforcement agencies might have been involved in Tupac's murder due to his politically charged lyrics and activism. And again, you have to think about the climate back in these days, in the late 80s, early 90s. They proposed that he was targeted for surveillance or elimination. Is the verbiage.
His family had been on, his godfather or stepfather had been on the FBI's most wanted list. He was a known affiliate of Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army members, communist groups. There was actually, I saw even there was you may get to this, of an extortion scheme by the Jewish Defense League.
I'm not going to get to that, actually.
Threats against Tupac and other rappers that didn't really get anywhere, but he was making some controversial statements. He was making them very publicly, and lots of people were listening and taking him seriously.
Yeah, well, it's been suggested that individuals in law enforcement agencies had a hand in either orchestrating the shooting or covering it up.
Yeah.
And some proponents of this theory point out the complexity of the investigation, the lack of conclusive results, evidence of potential law enforcement involvement. And they also argue that certain law enforcement figures might have had motives to target Tupac, such as his outspokenness on social issues and his involvement in controversy. So, anything to add more to that one?
Yeah, I just wanted
This is
to add
not my
one thing.
favorite.
Something
This
I
is not my
said
favorite.
could have come off very wrong. What I said that I meant is in 2011, via Freedom of Information Act, FBI released documents relating to this investigation where there was an alleged scheme by the Jewish Defense League. This is a far-right terrorist group that the FBI was investigating. This is not an actual, this is
Jewish
not some anti-Semitic trope. But there was a apparently right-wing terrorist group that had been making death threats against Tupac and other rappers.
All right. Well,
So
good
while we're
clarification.
talking about that the FBI was aware of that, and so I was making the leap of if the FBI was involved, we know the FBI was at least looking into other people where there was chatter enough that there's FBI documentation that there were groups talking about taking him out. So
All right. Hold on. So next is theory 3. And basically this one says that it suggests that law enforcement agencies might have been involved in Tupac's murder due to his politically charged lyrics and activism. There we go. They propose that he was targeted for surveillance and or elimination. And basically what they're saying here is that law enforcement agencies had a hand in either orchestrating or covering up the shooting that resulted in Pac's death. And some proponents of this theory point to the complexity of the investigation, lack of conclusive results as evidence of potential law enforcement involvement. And they also argue that certain law enforcement figures might have had motives to target Tupac, again, such as his outspokenness on social issues and his involvement in controversies. Anything to add?
I mean, controversies and multiple incidents with police, including shooting at them.
Yes, I mean they do not take kindly to that. They don't.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then I guess that was pretty much that. So then let's talk about theory 4, which this one is about witnesses, and basically it proposes that people and witnesses with crucial information about the murder were intimidated or silenced, ultimately hindering the investigation. Now, again, Tupac's last words to the cop who asked who shot him were "fuck you." So,
yeah, I mean, this was the era of I remember
snitches get stitches.
Well, there was a stencil that people would use and would spray paint on stop signs around Montgomery. And so you would use the stencil, and with white underneath it, the word stop, it would be "stop snitching."
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, but that's funny.
It was the thing around Montgomery, at least. So
yeah, you didn't snitch, and so even in this case, because I would imagine in this case, if he had snitched, let's just go down the theory, the rabbit hole that, or Baby Lane is the person who pulled that trigger. Okay, let's just assume that for a minute. Well, if Pac survived, in the event that he would have survived that, which he probably maybe thought he would because he'd been shot before and survived, right, multiple times, then he didn't want them coming after him for snitching. I mean, I could see that as being a thing. But, basically this theory involves witness intimidation and suggests that individuals connected to or associated with the shooting threatened witnesses or potential informants to keep them from cooperating with law enforcement or revealing crucial information about the crime. Now, this theory stems from the fact that despite the high-profile nature of Tupac's murder and the subsequent investigation, that the case still remains unsolved, and that numerous witnesses were present at the scene of the shooting and or had information related to the incident, but many of them were reluctant to come forward or provide testimonies or evidence to aid in the investigation. Anything you want to add?
I mean, a
You
little
don't have to.
because, like we were saying before, this is kind of a hectic crime scene. You know, if I'm stuck in traffic on the Vegas Strip, I'm not really taking note of who's in what cars around me and what license plates are. So that
Okay.
may be a difficult one to find witnesses, even if they were being cooperative.
Well, so I think
But
that that's
also,
okay.
and if you're wondering, I mean, like, who's intimidating witnesses may be more of the question.
Well, let's talk about that. We have notes on that.
Ah,
Ah, so the potential reasons behind witness intimidation in Tupac's case are multifaceted. For example, fear of retaliation, which is some witnesses might have been afraid to retaliate of the retaliation of the perpetrators or those associated with them if they cooperated with the police. If you were associated with a gang like the Crips, you probably weren't looked too fondly upon if you were going to be seen talking to the police. Similar in the way that if you were in one of the five families and seen talking to the police, it probably would not look favorably um, upon you. Now, as we know, Tupac was a prominent figure in the hip hop world, and the individual responsible for his death may have had a reputation for violence, making witnesses apprehensive about speaking up. Then there's also the gang related tensions. The shooting that led to Tupac's death was rumored to be related to ongoing conflicts between rival great gangs in the hip hop community, East Coast versus West Coast. Witnesses from these circles might have been reluctant to cooperate with law enforcement due to the loyalty to their own groups or gangs and fear um, of retaliation from others involved in the feud, depending on how big this spread. Then there's the suspicion of police involvement, right? So some conspiracy theorists and individuals are skeptical of law enforcement and how might have speculated that officers or officials were somehow involved in the murder or its cover-up, as we talked about previously. And that suspicion could lead to witness to be hesitant about sharing information because you know what, if the police were involved in it and they were covering it up and you come forward with information and now you've told the police information, now you might be next on the target list. And to me, that's a pretty good reason to not come forward. And then, and for a lot of people in this situation, a lot of people in this situation were Black. They're people of color, right? And there was a lack of trust with the legal system, and they had good reason, still have good reason to distrust the legal system. And witnesses who come from communities with a history of mistrust or negative experiences with law enforcement might have been hesitant to cooperate, feeling that their statements might not have been taken seriously or that they could become targets themselves. But ultimately, the lack of cooperation from witnesses and scarcity of concrete evidence have made it really challenging for law enforcement to make significant progress in solving Pac's murder. So, anything to add to that one?
Not really. That's another one of these ones where you wonder. There are lots of reasons to be reticent with cooperating with police that aren't necessarily tied to a conspiracy. But I believe some of your next conspiracy theories may explain why witnesses may or may not have been so cooperative.
We are getting into the favorites of my theories. This one's a very good one. I'm not going to mark it as a favorite, but I put this one in this order for a reason because after this one we get into my two favorites. But this one was close. It deserves an honorable mention for sure. And that is the theory that Suge Knight, who was in the car driving that evening, had something to do with it, even though he was there and even though he got shot. And basically, the theory of this
shards hit him, and if you continue then on.
Okay, we'll continue. Then we'll chat. The theory suggests that Suge Knight was somehow involved in the planning or execution of the murder. Some variations of the theory propose that Suge orchestrated the shooting to eliminate Tupac due to conflicts with death row records or for financial gain. Others believe that Knight might have been motivated by a desire to gain control over Tupac's unreleased music and profits from his posthumous releases. So let's stop there and chat about that.
Again, let it be said that we are talking conspiracy theories here. None of these are endorsed or supported, but there are people who have alibis saying they were somewhere else that are questioned. One of the strongest alibis you could have is being there.
That's a good alibi.
On the receiving end. I mean, he didn't get struck by bullets, but had some, wounds from fragments of glass and bullets. This is one that some people have arguably latched onto because of his extensive criminal background.
And there was concern that, there were conflicts between Pac and Suge. There were conflicts between Suge and a lot of people on Death Row Records, Snoop Dogg being one of them. In fact, Snoop Dogg at one point has said that Snoop said that Suge has done it.
That's aware of that.
Yeah, that was told. I will say this. I didn't fact check that. The person who told me that was supposed to be on this podcast with us. So I didn't go, but everything she said was gospel. It was true for what I looked at. So I'm assuming this one is too. So take that for what it's worth. But apparently in an interview years later, Snoop apparently was on a plane. I forget where they were flying from, but he was next to Suge, and Snoop was so terrified being next to Suge that he slept with a fork and a knife. This is pre 9/11, by the way. So, I think that speaks volumes, right? Because Snoop was a gangster. Now, Snoop's not really a violent gangster, but he is a gangster.
I mean, you may want to relook at
Well, Snoop. He used to be.
He was not convicted of violent crimes.
It never happened. No, I'm kidding. But anyways, so that was kind of the thing. And they were right. Tupac was a cash cow. As Mark had mentioned earlier, he lived in that studio. He was putting out track after track, and not just for quantity. They were quantity and quality. And Suge knew that if Tupac died and Death Row still held the rights to the music, then that was it. And they could continue putting out music for, a decade plus later, which is what happened. And occasionally, it hasn't been in a while, but occasionally will still happen, and probably will continue to for a while.
Just did a quick lookup. Snoop was tried, but eventually acquitted for both first and second degree murder in 1993.
Okay. Because he was acquitted because he's innocent. I'm going to believe that. You leave me alone.
No, I'm just, while we're talking about if Snoop is scared of Suge Knight, there is reason to be scared of Suge Knight.
Well, that's true.
This is a person with, this is not slander on Snoop, but if Snoop is scared to be on a plane next to Suge, that's because
it speaks a lot.
Yeah, Suge Knight's a gangster.
Yeah, and Tupac's, that was money. So, the alleged involvement of Suge in Tupac's murder is often linked to the fact that the shooting occurred while both of them were riding together in the car in Vegas, going to the club that Suge owned. As mentioned a few minutes ago, Suge was injured in the shooting but survived fragments. And his association with Tupac, along with his reputation as a powerful and controversial figure in the music industry, led to suspicion that he might have played a role in the assassination. However, it's important to note that Suge has consistently denied any involvement in Tupac's murder. We are not accusing Suge Knight, Mr. Knight, please do not come after us in 2034. We are not accusing you. We were just reading things we found on the internet.
Yes.
That's all we're doing.
Conspiracy theories that other people have put out there.
Correct.
We are just discussing them.
We are the messenger. And the theory that you did it, sir, is not my favorite, so please be okay with that.
What is your favorite theory?
Well, I guess you'll wait and find out. And the listeners have to find out too. Anyway, so law enforcement agencies had, did run a thorough investigation on Suge and his possible connection to the murder, but no conclusive evidence linking him to the crime has ever been presented, and therefore he's not been charged in connection of Pac's death. So a couple of things that I want to just mention before we go on to the last two theories, which are my favorites, is that one is I like how, when we're doing research, sometimes it's called an assassination versus a murder, and I think that assassination is appropriate. And I just want to point that out because there is a difference between a murder and an assassination. All assassinations are murders, but not all murders are assassinations. Right? Would you agree to that statement? And because of the political and social commentary that Pac often did, and the way he stood up, I think that assassination is appropriate. That's all I'm saying. So a couple honorable mentions before we get to my favorites. Is there's a multiple theory shooter that I'm not even going to get into, but it delves into a lot of different facets. It's not worth an in-depth explanation. It talks about like the angles and fragments and blah 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 blah. But whatever. There's also
a multiple shooter theory.
That it could have been a multiple shooter incident. Okay. That one it deserves an honorable mention, but it doesn't deserve a full segment because I think that one's less likely. I mean, some of these are not likely, but that one's just nobody wants to hear about. I don't think that one's realistic.
I saw one I didn't bring up that there was even the FBI had looked into a right-wing extremist group that was targeting some of the hip hop artists of that era.
That's one.
Again, there's evidence they looked into it, but
who knows what came of it.
Yeah.
There was also accusations that Snoop did it. And there's also accusations that Biggie himself did it or had something to do with the hit. Now, we know that Biggie I don't want to get about Biggie was in New York at the time of the shooting.
Yes.
We know that. He had a strong alibi.
No, okay. He was in New York.
Exactly. He was in New York. Now, it's also been suggested that he had something to do with it. So let's segue into the last two theories we're going to talk about and my favorite two, starting with the theory that suggests Sean Diddy, Puffy, P. Diddy, Combs was involved in ordering the murders of both Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G.
Oh, I knew there was theories that he was involved with Pac. Then that whole song and video for Missing You would be pretty phony and hypocritical. Yeah. Were this true?
And we're not going to get into the thing with Biggie on that. And Biggie's mom believes that Puff Daddy, it was Puff Daddy at the time, right?
Yeah, it was Puff Daddy at the time.
That Puff Daddy had something to do with the death. She's kind of thought that for a long time.
But he was also in the same theory with Suge Knight. Like, he was the cash cow. He was the only reason anybody knew who Puff Daddy was.
Yeah, and exactly.
He even I felt like made the Missing You song and video just to be like ride those coattails one last time and hopefully be forever linked with this other artist who he was not on a level with.
Yeah, I mean, Diddy, he's a talented artist, but it's not the same level of the two people that we're talking about here. Not anywhere close. Not even in the same ballpark.
Brilliant entrepreneur and businessman.
Great businessman. Okay, so this theory, the origins of it can be traced back to the intense rivalry. Again, this is why we had to, by the way, explain in depth the East Coast, West Coast wars, because so much of that plays into a lot of these theories. But it traces back to the rivalry between the East Coast and West Coast hip-hop scenes during the 90s. Now, Sean Combs, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, whatever you want to call him, is the founder of Bad Boy Records, which represented the East Coast, and he was the producer and manager of Notorious B.I.G., who was one of, if not the most, this is one of the most prominent East Coast rappers. I would say the most prominent, especially at that time. Tupac, on the other hand, had accused Combs and Biggie of involvement in the 1994 shooting, which we did talk about this earlier, that he survived in New York City at the recording studio. And so this incident fueled further animosity between the two coasts and added tension surrounding the artist and their entourages. And again, Pac, until the day he died, believed that Diddy had something to do with that shooting. I mean, he was dying, no pun intended, but he was going to die on that hill. So this theory gained traction after the murders of both Tupac and Biggie, and some believe that Diddy had a motive to have them killed to eliminate rivals and further solidify his and Bad Boys Records' dominance over the hip hop industry. However, again, as all of these are, it is crucial to note that law enforcement agencies conducted extensive investigations into the death of Tupac and Biggie, and the official investigations did not lead to any charge against Sean Combs or anybody associated with him. So, Mr. Combs, we were just reading. You and Mr. Knight, please leave us alone.
Yes.
So, now let's get into my favorite theory, which, if we've not talked about anything else, what do you think it is?
Oh, that he's still alive.
He is still alive.
That would be the guess. I mean, the Dave Chappelle theory.
This Dave Chappelle theory. So let's talk about this one. This one is my favorite. And basically, this suggests that Tupac is still alive and faked his death to escape the dangers of his celebrity status or to lead a private life away from the public eye. This theory has gained traction among a lot of people. It says conspiracy theorists, but a lot of people and fans who refuse to believe that he is truly gone. It lacks substantial evidence and defies reason and logic. But that doesn't mean it isn't a fun theory, because it is. So here, let's talk about some of the main points that the hoax brings up. Okay. First, it's the lack of visual proof. One of the central arguments put forth by believers of the Tupac is not dead theory is the supposed absence of clear and convincing visual evidence surrounding Tupac's death. The available footage of the shooting only shows the aftermath of the incident, and there are no public images or videos of Tupac's dead body. This has led a lot of people to question the authenticity of his death. Then there's witness inconsistencies, which we talked about, and the fact that the witnesses that have talked, they're just inconsistent with each other. And basically, they argue that these discrepancies would suggest a cover-up or a staged event. Then there's the alleged sightings, which over the years, there have been numerous sightings of Tupac in all different parts of the world. In support of this theory, see sightings as evidence that he's still alive. There's also the witness protection angle of this. I don't know if you knew this one, the witness protection angle. Okay. Tupac might have entered the witness protection program, or that he faked his death to escape potential threats to his life. Maybe to give out some information on other stuff that was going on in his thug life connections. Maybe. That's not. I'm not subscribing to that one.
What I like about this theory the most isn't the sightings. I mean, there's 7 billion people on this planet. I'm sure there's at least a dozen who look almost exactly like me out there. To follow kind of, I call this the Dave Chappelle theory, is he just kept putting out music and it kept being relevant. And there was a sketch in the Chappelle show about how Tupac always seemed to be talking about stuff that happened after his death. It's like The Simpsons predicting all these things that, it's taken on a life of its own. And it's not just that The Simpsons have, 30 plus seasons of dozens of episodes per season that just,
touch on everything that happens.
Yeah, you fire off a couple 100,000 shots. You're statistically likely to hit a few times.
I really like that you brought this up because cryptic lyrics is one of the things on this list, and exactly for what you just said, that there's clues in his later songs that indicate he faked his death. They point to lines that seemingly reference his supposed plan to disappear or go into hiding. And then, as you're talking about cryptic lyrics and things like you said that happened later, basically I'm taking two theories and putting them into the one because I think that their work, which is the Machiavelli persona theory. And Mark, how about, because this is more your line, why don't you explain to the people who Machiavelli is or was?
Niccolo Machiavelli was an Italian Renaissance politician and author who his famous work, The Prince, is a amoral guide to practical politics, where there's a long tradition in European literature of works meant to be guiding young nobles or royals And so that's what this kind of purports to be, of like, it's a book to a young prince so that he can read and learn how to be a good ruler. But unlike earlier works that are focused on the morals of how to right versus wrong as a leader, the prince is purely success versus failure. So it's using intrigue and every tool at a ruler's disposal to control your people and your territory. And so, again, it's a lot of people have used this, where you'll see, even business classes and MBA programs using this. You'll see politicians referencing it as ways to kind of gain and maintain power at all costs,
including faking one's death to gain that advantage.
Now, fair warning, I haven't actually read The Prince. I know
that's fair. Okay, so
interesting story on just thinking Machiavellian 7-day theory. There's a great story I read at one point before this about a church in the Philippines that wanted to get that was doing some English and wanted to get the Hail Mary prayer written and in like a little thing that would get printed out both in the native Filipino language and in English. And they looked up the English translation for Hail Mary and accidentally printed out thousands of copies with the Hail Mary prayer on one side and the Tupac lyrics on the other side.
Interesting.
So lots of confused English learners there.
Well, to go off what we're talking about, I've not read The Prince either, but that's what we have Google for. And basically, Machiavelli's ideas about manipulation of power, deception, and the idea of faking one's own death to gain advantage. And that intrigued Pac. And he was not shy about it. He rapped about Machiavelli. And in fact, in the final year of his life, he became so captivated by the works of Machiavelli, it became his alter ego. And he decided to adopt the name of Machiavelli. Now, here's one thing about Tupac, and you can't see it because we're on a podcast, but he liked to change the way he spelled things just because he could.
Yeah.
And so he didn't spell Machiavelli like the traditional Italian way. He spelled it, basically as he wanted to and adopted it as his stage name. Now, here's where it gets extra interesting and why the he's still alive theory. I'm not going to say it holds water, but maybe has a slight bit of traction. Maybe the traction controls turned on it a little bit. Is that 2 months after his death, exactly on November 6, 1996, the album Don Illuminati, the 7-Day Theory, which was completed before Tupac's death but released posthumously, was released under the moniker of Machiavelli. And that was planned before he died. Died, air quotes. The choice of this name, along with certain themes and lyrics in the album, fueled speculation and conspiracy theories that he might have faked his death and was still alive and now working under this new persona. And even the cover of that album, it's an image of Tupac on a cross, which some saw as symbolic as his resurrection or rebirth through the Machiavelli persona. And additionally, there were rumors of hidden messages and clues within albums, lyrics, and artwork that hinted Tupac's supposed plan to fake his death.
See, now I hadn't heard about this. I knew there's obviously the controversy of him on the cross. I've heard him referred to a lot as the kind of a martyr figure in gangster rap. And I wonder if that was a choice, especially being after his death. But
yeah, it's interesting, right? But here's the thing about people finding cryptic messages in lyrics. Paul is Dead is probably one of the most famous ones. And Paul is very much alive, unless you believe that current Paul McCartney is a robot. I don't know. Whatever.
It's like Avril Lavigne. It's clearly not the same one.
Yeah, exactly. Not the same Avril Lavigne. Now, here's something interesting, and this is going to play into what has recently happened. One name that we haven't mentioned in this entire thing that has popped up a lot during research is a guy by the name of Dwayne Keith Davis. known by the street names of Keefe D, Keefe D. He is now 60 years old, and he is a former member of the South Side Compton Crips. And I say former member, but are you really ever a former member when you're in something like that?
Again, don't know. As I said, Latin
Yeah.
teachers and gangsters are pretty far apart, but
Yeah. Well, fair
we
enough.
can only
That's
speculate
touche. Okay. Well, yes, you weren't a
and
Crip.
share what we've read.
All right. Well, you're not a Crip, so I will leave you that. Well, anyways, he was a. It says that he's a former, but I think you're in. I think it's blood in, blood out, basically. He's been linked to events surrounding Tupac's murder, and consequently, Keefe D is the uncle of DeAndre Dre Smith, who's another individual allegedly associated with the Southside Compton Crips. And I believe, unless I'm wrong, and the people will let me know if I am, I believe Keefe D is also Orlando Anderson's, Baby Lane's uncle. And for years, he has claimed that he was in the car that night. In fact, in a 2018 docuseries titled Unsolved, The Murders of Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. aired, and during the series, Keefe D made a controversial revelation. He claimed that he was present in the vehicle the night of Tupac's murder. According to Keefe D's account, he was in the car with three other individuals. His nephew was Dre, Terrence, who's known as T Brown, and Darren Zip Sims. Okay, and Keefe D stated that they were the ones responsible for the fatal shooting of Tupac Shakur. However, instead of directly shooting Tupac, he claimed that it was his nephew Dre, which actually, sorry, I did say something incorrectly. I need to go back. That would mean it's not Orlando. It would be Dre, who pulled the trigger. This alleged confession was highly publicized and generated significant media attention, and it implicated individuals connected to the Southside Compton Crips in the murder. Now, let's fast forward from that September night in 1996 to July 17th, 2023. That's just a few days ago, when news broke that Las Vegas police were serving a warrant on a home to the almost 30-year-old cold case of Tupac Shakur. At the time of the news, it wasn't publicized as to whose home was being served. We now know that the warrant was served on Keefe D's home in connection to the Tupac murder. Police from that well, called a raid, but home, took his desktop computer, a laptop, 40 ink cartridges, a copy of the book Compton Street Legends, a copy of a Vibe magazine issue on Tupac, and 2 light tubs of photographs and other documents. I don't know if you saw the warrant. I think you did. I just think that it's worth noting that the person who wrote the handwriting of the who logged everything was great handwriting. And for anybody who is listening to this, if you want to go see the warrant, it is on my Instagram. Justin on TikTok is the Instagram name, and you can go look at it and read it in its entirety there should you want to. Now, the warrant was signed by Judge Jacqueline M. Bluth, and she had allowed for the seizures of the computers, electronic storage devices, typed or handwritten notes concerning media coverage of Tupac's murder, and documentation of Keefe D's affiliation with the Crips, among a few other items. And that's what happened, which is why we're making this podcast today. Because when that broke, I was like, screw everything else I was doing. We're going to talk about Pac.
I'm very curious to see if and what we hear from this. You know, you don't want it to be another like Al Capone's vault situation where it's just a big nothing burger. But obviously, I think all, not just fans of Tupac, but everybody who was paying attention at the time has a lot of questions.
Yeah.
A lot of curiosity of, you know, was this a just heat of the moment conflict that escalated to deadly violence? Was this some kind of coordinated gang hit or more?
So
I'll be curious to see what comes out of this. I certainly
if
love.
anything.
Yeah.
If anything. But here's the thing, and you and I talked about this offline, but we'll talk about it here because I think listeners should know this. The judge just signed off on a warrant to search this guy's house after a case is almost 30 years old. There has to be a reason for that. They're not going to arbitrarily do that. Warrants are not that easy to get.
Yeah, they don't
It's
just
not arbitrary.
sign warrants. And so one of the things we were saying is like, maybe they're looking for something specific. And if they're looking for something specific, they have to have pretty good reason to believe that it will be there, that there is something that is relevant to a case that is likely to be in a certain place. The other thing we were saying, though, is this just shows the lingering impact of this man's career. Like, people still care, and not just it's not just people who are casual fans. Like, these people who are adults and now are even in positions of power who are still upset that this, artist, poet, commentator,
social activist.
Yeah, activist, that he was shot before he had a chance to finish telling us all the things he would have told us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I certainly, despite 6 or 7 posthumous albums, I would have liked another 12.
Yeah.
He was putting out music so fast.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see what the next phase of his career. I never got to see Jedi Master Tupac.
You didn't, and you're not going to now unless they holograph him.
And what is now? I mean, now if we're talking about hologram Jedis, that fits right into the canon, but that's a separate story.
Well, that I've not seen Star Wars, but that's beside the point.
I forgot. Get out of here with that.
Anyways.
Well, sometimes when Jedi Masters die, they come back as Force ghosts and look like holograms. So,
all right,
Force Ghost Tupac could fit right into the canon.
I just can't with you.
But when you think about I'm curious when I see Snoop Dogg out here selling weed-scented candles with Martha Stewart, when I see Are We There Yet 2?
He's got a child show.
Oh, yeah. When I see Are We There Yet 2 with Ice Cube, it's, you always hear about it's like only the good die young, and that's a stereotype that's problematic for itself. But what would the second and third act of his career have been?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think that, as we reflect on the complex and mysterious case of Tupac's murder, I think we are left wondering if there will ever be closure on this incredibly famous and impactful tragedy. And as time passes, new theories may emerge and investigations may continue, offering hope for answers. And obviously, for anybody who's eager to stay up to date on that and any new developments, feel free to follow my TikTok if you don't already. Again, Justin on TikTok for the latest news and insights. But nevertheless, as of the time we are recording this podcast, which is July 25th, right? Yeah, 2023. Tupac's murder remains officially unsolved, shrouded in uncertainty and speculation within pop culture. It's undeniable that Tupac was one of the most influential and iconic artists in the history of rap, if not all music. His profound impact on the world will, continues to be felt long after his death, as Mark had mentioned kind of earlier. And given that his death happened at such a young age of 25. And like you said, when contemplating all that Tupac achieved and the legacy that he left behind, it really is impossible not to wonder what more he could have accomplished had his life not been cut tragically short. So as we celebrate his music and his memory, we can only imagine the greatness that he might have achieved, even more so than the greatness that he has achieved, had he been granted more time in this world. And before we close this out, you had read a very interesting quote, and I feel like that would be a good way to close this.
Well, I pulled a couple, so let me. I don't want to, but a couple that music journalist Chuck Phillips said that Tupac, quote, helped elevate rap from a crude street fad to a complex art form, setting the stage for global hip hop phenomenon that we have currently. The slang silenced one of modern music's most eloquent voices. a ghetto poet whose tales of urban alienation captivated young people of all races and backgrounds.
That's so eloquent.
In 2014, in a BT publication, they said, quote, "His confounding mixture of ladies' man, thug, revolutionary, and poet has forever altered our perception of what a rapper should look like, sound like, and act like. It's easy to see that Tupac is the most copied MC of all time."
Oh, 100%.
And current Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, called Tupac, quote, "the best rapper alive." And when questioned on this, she said, quote, "West Coast girls still think Tupac lives on."
When did she used to make that quote? When was the year or date of that quote?
2020.
2020. There you go.
So it's to say that an artist who can get former, was she Attorney General of California?
I think
I
so.
believe.
I think so.
Was a senator, I think was Attorney General in California before she was a U.S.
I'm pretty
senator
sure she was.
and vice president, but somebody who can still just bring out that young fandom to come out immediately and be like, oh yeah, I may be the vice president of the U.S., but I'm still a West Coast girl who loves Tupac.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is why this investigation still captivates us, that we look at this artist and still listen to his music and say, what if? And there's a lot of people who come and go and are a flash in the pan. And clearly Tupac is not one of those.
Technical difficulties in the background of Mark's end.
Yes.
We'll see if we can edit those out.
Dog
Big deal.
is being loud.
It's okay. I think this was a lot of fun to do. I think it was very interesting, and I really appreciate you being on. And I think we definitely need to have more episodes where you are a friend of the show, I think.
Well, happy to join. Happy to be part of the show.
Yeah, we gotta find somebody else to talk about. But I felt this one was up your alley, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, I'll let you know when it's up.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure being on the show. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
And I will probably be listening to Tupac for the rest of the day now.
Yeah, I was listening to Hit 'Em Up on the way back from our break. So anyways, all right, everybody, we'll catch you next month on the next episode.